Hi everyone. So let's see. So one thing I often see as a bit of a problem in figure drawings is the joints. So let's see. Every time you have a figure, let's do an arm here, you're going to have a combination of, I would say, joint, cylinder, joint, cylinder, joint, cylinder, or I should say maybe a joint and then a connector and then a joint and a connector. So the connector is not necessarily a cylinder, but your joint could be a ball joint. So you could have these three ball joints here, and then in between is a connector. So this could be an arm, it could be a leg. In this case, I'm drawing it kind of as an arm. And I'm going to look at the 3D construction of these joints and connectors. So you are going to junction together something like a box object. In this case, I'm going to use a box object instead of a cylinder. And I'm going to very distinctly carving out a box cross section out of this. And then you're going to have another box cross section here. So if you're dealing with construction, you need enough room in between for that joint, and all of these parts have to align and snap together, right? If they don't snap together, it doesn't look solid, and sometimes, weird things occur. So you can see how there's this very, very clear connection on the construction. And again, I'm drawing a lot more information than you would normally see. Like, I'm drawing the hidden lines, and it feels very solid. It feels like it's all assembled or constructed, as they would say. Now, for something like, let's say, the pelvis, this is an area where, actually, hold on, I'm going to doodle it, because if I try to construct it first, it's actually, the thing is I usually do a sketch first. So I get things within the ballpark, and I'm going to get the legs to come forward. So it's like a seated position. And the construction is something that I do afterwards. Okay, so we'll do one of these legs first, and then I will do the other one. Actually, yeah, let's do it like that. Okay. So this is the loose sketch, but now I need to go in there, I need to tighten things up and correct everything. So in this case, there's the joint and connector thing. And this time I'm going to do it very rigidly, very angular and boxy. Again, because it gives us the feeling of solidity, even though it feels unnatural. I'm going to do this just to make it really, just to get the point across. Okay, so we are seeing the underside of this box here. And I'm going to put a terminator there. All right, this whole thing. Again, this is where the connector meets the pelvis. So I'm going to carefully define that connector. Make it really obvious to the eye, to the viewer, right? There's the underside. So we can really feel that boxy construction. And you can see this transition going like that, right? There's this. You've got to sense the series, right? There's a series of these lines. Right, so you got to look at them as series. Same thing here. There's another series here. Once again, another series down here. So these are just, you don't have to draw them, but you just got to keep them up here. And you've got to, you got to ghost them in your head, meaning you have to imagine them there without actually drawing them, right? And you can do this. In fact, you can do it without even really intending to. If I draw this and then I draw this, if you look at them, you can see how they mentally, right, they'll come together and they form an intersection, right? You can see, like, your brain will, if I draw it like this, I can kind of sense that there's a connection, right? Without even drawing it, even without it there, you need to kind of work that part of your brain which fills in the gaps. So here, let's get rid of that blue line. I'm going to further refine this. So let's knock that back. Right, that's where that pelvic joint is. And we're just going to look at the, like, brute force topology. So we're going to just treat the whole thing as like a big old Tetris block. So there's where you're, we're just going to let that go straight in. So this is the underside, right? We can tell that this is the underside here. Right, and this also here, we need, there's a terminator block here because this is where the leg socket's on. So these are all things that you kind of have to be able to keep track of. And then there's another, well, in this case, I'm not going to draw a terminator. I'm going to draw the other leg extruding off of this. And yeah, I'm kind of going all wacky right now. All right, so when you think of the pelvis, you've got to keep track of the topology and how the joints and the connectors go together. It's the junction, right? The junction is right here. That's where you really need to pay the most attention. This is where things typically go wrong because people will practice things like this. They will practice cylinders, right? They get really good at drawing their cylinders, or they draw boxes and they get really good at drawing boxes. These are connectors. But what they don't practice, and this is what you need to practice, are connectors. And connectors or junctions are things like this. You need to draw this combination of connectors. Right. And even something like this, I would do lineless. Like I do unsupported lines. I do a lot of these. I done. And this is also something where I train, right? Unsupported lines, but you can see all the unit cubes that make this thing up. It feels, here it actually kind of feels a little off, but you know, I can get pretty darn close unsupported. So you need to train your unsupported line drawing. Unsupported meaning you don't draw any, there's no sketch, there's no underlying lines. You're just going straight for the occluding lines, just the hidden lines and the occluding. You're just going for occlusion lines only. So this is, this is all the information here. I'll draw all the information that you don't draw. You don't draw any of this, right? Otherwise, the exercise is pointless. Like, you can draw it after the fact, but you don't draw it at the beginning. You are working unsupported because all the supporting lines have to be up here. Okay. So you can see what this does is, right? This object, this shape is full of junctions. There's a junction up here, there's a junction here, there's another junction here, and they're all at different orientations. And if you want to go like one level deeper on this, you want to make this like one level harder, then you have to add this piece in here. So that makes it even more difficult. That ramps up the difficulty like substantially. And then if you want to make it even harder, then you've got to draw that piece in there as well. Right? Then you're dealing with junctions at all angles, and you have to deal with occlusion. Occlusion is when something blocks, right? It's like, where'd it go, right? Because it got blocked. So I can give you another really good exercise to build your ability to handle support, like working unsupported. Unsupported means you didn't put on any, there's no crutches on the paper, right? Instead, no, you strengthen your mind so you don't need the paper crutches. So this exercise is, here, I will draw it with guidelines first, and start with guidelines because we're going to basically assault your brain with a really difficult task. And if you approach this, like this is a mental push-up. All right, that's what this exercise is. This exercise is like doing mental push-ups, and you're stacking on the weights, and you're going to make it harder and harder and harder for yourself, so that it's going to be really uncomfortable and weird. And the more you do it, the less uncomfortable and weird it becomes, and the more you get used to it, and then eventually it's like it becomes a lot easier for you. And then you'll find that by when you are tasked with doing other things, like when you're tasked to actually do your actual work, it's like this job is harder than your actual work, so you'll find it will make your other work easier. So this is the mental push-up, and this is with practically no weight stacked onto it. So this is fully supported. We have all the line crutches. So there are four directions you can go. Actually, there's multiple directions. Let's not even bother counting. So there's going in, there's going down, there's going out, and then there's going up. All right. So you have to remember that there's these four directions. So there's in, out, down, up. And then there's also going around. All right, so you've got to go like this. You have to alternate between going in one of these directions and going around. So I'm going to do it now. It works like this. In, around, down, around, out, around, up, around. That's one piece of the sequence. And then without lifting your stylus, you go in, around, down, around, out, around, up, around. Then you gotta go in, around, out, around, then down, around, in, around, up, around. Right? So you can see that if I get rid of those blue lines, you get this feeling of a dimensional object. Okay, so now what you gotta, so that's supported, but you want to train unsupported. So in this case, it's around, in, around, down, around, out, around, up, around, in, around, down, around, out, around, up, around, in, around, down. And you're trying to maintain this. Around, up, around, in, around, down, around, out, around, up, around, in, around, down, around, out, around, up, around. This is the mental push-up, right? Because it's hard. You're flexing your brain. You're making that brain earn its keep. Up, around, in, around, down, around, out, around, up, around, in, around. And it gets easier because your lines begin to support, right? So that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to construct the most coveted object in all of mankind, a piece of toilet paper, a roll of toilet paper, unsupported, all right? And this will help you a lot when it comes to your sketches, because now what's happening is that each one of your lines takes on a significant meaning that the lines can be going in, they can be going around. You're carving through space. So when it comes time to start drawing, right, a line like this, right, it's like, oh, I'm coming towards now, I'm going down, I'm going away, I'm going up. And there's a reason why we do the alternation, because it's easy to keep going around like that, right? Then we can go, you know, in. Like the thing is that when you do this, your brain is allowed to, it's allowed to contextualize, all right? So what I mean by the brain contextualizing, it's like, if you keep doing the job, your brain is like, at first your brain just fell off the freaking turnip truck, and it's like, what do I do? What do I do? What's going on? What's going on? I don't know what to do, right? And then you're throwing tasks at it, and the brain's like, oh, okay, I can do this thing. And if you keep throwing the same task at it, then the brain's like, okay, I'm going to get used to this, and it settles down. The brain always wants to go into an equilibrium, all right? And so this is one context, right? That is another context. And then doing, you know, going and making these vertical spars, this is another context, right? The brain keeps getting, it gets to contextualize every time you task it with something repeatable like this, right? It gets to contextualize. So by giving you the toilet paper exercise or the duct tape exercise, what happens is that whenever you do this, you are in one context, then your brain gets thrown out of that context, has to switch to a new context, and it needs to adapt to the new context, but then it gets thrown out of the context, and then it has to adapt again, and it gets thrown out. And so you're constantly throwing your brain into new situations, into new contexts. It's like army training, right? It's like pick up that gun, load the gun, aim the gun, shoot the gun. Now you got to run over here. You got to do this, got to do that. And it's like, it's the drill. This is the drill to give your brain some military grade. You know, you're trying to give your brain some military grade adaptability. You're trying to make that brain really strong so that it can switch from context to context to context. And then when you're looking at a person, all right? I mean, what is, when we look at a, like that's another context. This is another context. All of these little lines that I'm drawing, these doodle lines, like these are all, I'm constantly switching from one context to the next, right? If we want to pull the arm, make that come closer, there's another context. So like every single piece that you draw in the human body, or every time you make a new joint and you make a new junction, you make a new connector, like each one of these things is another context. And you need the mental fluidity to be able, you need the military grade mental fluidity to be able to handle the burdens of switching from part to part, you know, when you I'm kind of randomly throwing this together, but I can do this because I've got, you know, I've really trained, you know, that duct tape exercise, right? And then of course I've deeply trained my you know, deeply trained that, right? So I can very easily switch around. And yeah, that's really we are always going to come back to this because it's the fundamental, right? It's the fundamental building block. And yeah, you've got to be able to work on your joints. You've got to be able to work on your joints and your junctions to be able to rapidly construct these things, even in a rough fashion. Right, so you can see how this goes up over and around, right, and it's going back now, and you've got to be able to handle all of this. And this is what allows you to, like, people ask, you know, are my proportions correct? And I'm like, it's not about proportions. It's about being able to have a grasp of the space, of the dimensional space, and being able to plop things into that space and turn them into something solid that you could grab onto, and like it feels solid, right? It's got you're making an illusion, right? You're constructing the illusion, And so you've got to be able to assemble. What you're doing is you're if this stuff was all made out of Lego, right? And we're talking construction, you are speeding up your ability to mentally snap together all the pieces and then, make the figure quickly. And you need to be able to do this quickly because ideas are fleeting. Ideas are fleeting, emotion is fleeting, and if your ideas and your emotion are fleeting, then they will not hang around waiting for you to draw them. And if your brain is focused on the craft and is trying to, how do I get this thing done right? And it's not at a military grade instinctual level, at an automatic level, then you take your brain off of your imagination. And then now you're working into this technical crafty way of thinking, this analytical left brain way of thinking. And whatever emotion you were trying to get into your work just becomes sterile. It becomes very sterile and boring, and it loses the ability to entertain. And I mean, there are works which are extremely technically competent, but they appeal to us. They appeal to the audience only in a novel fashion, because it's novelty, and they're like, oh wow, look at the skill, but they're not interested. They're not, being swept away by any of the acting or emotion or the drama that is supposed to be unfolding in front of them. So you've got to get yourself up to that military grade level. All right, you gotta drill that stuff. Be your own drill instructor and do the mental push-ups, and do exercises that really challenge you. And if you can rise to that challenge and you can get used to that, handling those kinds of challenges, you willingly take on those challenges. You're going to suffer. But you're going to suffer. You get to choose the manner of your suffering. And so if you willingly approach the suffering, you take it on wholeheartedly, and you take it on seriously, and you make that, it means that every time you get better at it, it becomes meaningful to you, right? And you're going to be able to keep advancing. You're going to keep getting better and better. And that's what's important, is those little victories that you get day to day as you get better at these sorts of exercises, which translate directly into drawing skills. So yeah, that's the best thing I can say. So anyway, yeah, let's do a little bit of figure drawing. So here, right, it's like we've got the end of the, what is it, the connector? Is that what I call it? Right, so the connector reaches a junction, and then, so that's where your ankle is. And then, of course, the other thing I do is I tend to split up the foot into multiple masses. So even something loose like this, right? It's like you can still see there's where this connector ends, that's where this connector ends, and then in between is the junction right here. Anyway, yeah, the video is probably getting longer and longer and longer, and I should stop. But this is the thing, is you want to get yourself to the point where the time is passing and you're not even thinking about it. And you should always be seeking right, you should be seeking a way to get to that point where you're at that, in that particular state. It's a meditative state. You know, I'd say this is like achieving nirvana, right? Where you become unaware of your suffering, because life is suffering. This is a typical Buddhist concept, is that life is suffering, but you need to approach that. You need to, find a way to get to that state where you're not aware of your suffering, and you're just thinking about the thing that you're doing, the thing that you're enjoying. Like that's nirvana. And the time is just passing, and you're doing stuff and you're getting stuff done, and it's like, it's very fulfilling. It's very fulfilling. You can spend your whole life, just in that state. That's great. And it's not necessarily, I won't call it a state of happiness. It's a state of purpose. It's a state of, an incredible state. Okay, cool. So you get the idea. Let's cut it here.